Sarah Mitchell had always been fascinated by airplanes. At 12 years old, she could identify different aircraft models from the ground and had memorized the basic principles of flight from countless aviation books. Her father, Captain James Mitchell, was a commercial airline pilot who often shared stories about flying, never imagining that his daughter's curiosity would one day save lives. On a crisp Tuesday morning in October, Sarah was traveling with her younger brother Tommy and their Aunt Lisa aboard Flight 447, a small charter aircraft bound for Denver. The family was heading to her grandfather's ranch for a long-awaited reunion. Sarah had chosen a seat near the cockpit, hoping to catch glimpses of the pilots at work during the 2-hour journey. Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Chen were experienced aviators with thousands of flight hours between them. The weather conditions were perfect, with clear skies and minimal turbulence predicted for their route. As the twin-engine aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 30,000 feet, everything seemed routine. The 23 passengers settled in for what should have been an uneventful flight. Sarah noticed something unusual about 30 minutes into the flight. The steady hum of conversation from the cockpit had stopped completely. She pressed her face against the small window separating the passenger cabin from the flight deck and saw both pilots slumped motionless in their seats. Captain Rodriguez's head had fallen forward onto his chest, while First Officer Chen was leaning sideways against his window. Initially, Sarah thought the pilots might be resting or perhaps discussing something quietly. But as minutes passed without any movement or communication from the cockpit, a cold fear began to grip her stomach. She had heard her father mention emergency procedures countless times, and she knew that pilots never both sleep or become unresponsive during flight. The aircraft continued flying straight and level, maintained by the autopilot system that kept them on course. But Sarah understood from her father's explanations that autopilot was not a permanent solution. Eventually, the plane would need human intervention for navigation changes, weather adjustments, or most critically, for landing. She quietly unbuckled her seatbelt and moved closer to the cockpit door. Through the gap, she could see the control panels with their countless switches, buttons, and glowing displays. The radio was crackling occasionally with air traffic control communications, but no one in the cockpit was responding. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the gravity of the situation. Other passengers remained unaware of the crisis unfolding just feet away from them. They continued reading magazines, sleeping, or chatting quietly, trusting that their lives were in capable hands. Sarah faced an impossible decision that no child should ever have to make. She could alert the other passengers and create panic, or she could try to handle the situation herself using the knowledge she had absorbed from years of listening to her pilot father. The weight of 23 lives suddenly rested on the shoulders of a 12-year-old girl who had never flown an aircraft but had spent countless hours absorbing every detail her father shared about aviation. Sarah took a deep breath and made a choice that would change her life forever. She decided to enter the cockpit and attempt to establish communication with air traffic control. As she carefully opened the cockpit door, the full complexity of the flight controls became apparent. The instrument panel looked like something from a science fiction movie, with dozens of gauges, switches, and digital displays. The autopilot was indeed keeping them flying straight. But Sarah knew this was only a temporary reprieve. She had to act quickly before fuel became an issue or before air traffic control realized something was wrong with Flight 447. Sarah approached Captain Rodriguez first, gently shaking his shoulder and calling his name. There was no response. His breathing was shallow but steady, suggesting he was unconscious rather than deceased. She checked First Officer Chen with the same result. Both men appeared to be suffering from some form of incapacitation, possibly due to oxygen deprivation or food poisoning from something they had eaten before the flight. The radio crackled again with a transmission directed at their aircraft. Flight 447, Denver Center. Please respond to your assigned altitude change. Sarah stared at the radio equipment, remembering her father's explanations about aviation communication protocols. She knew she had to answer, but she also understood that revealing a 12-year-old was attempting to handle the emergency might create even more panic among air traffic controllers. Time was running out, and Sarah had to make another critical decision. She could continue trying to wake the pilots. She could return to the passenger cabin and inform the adults. Or, she could take direct action herself, looking at the peaceful faces of the unconscious pilots and thinking about her little brother and the other innocent passengers depending on her. Sarah reached for the radio microphone with trembling hands. The next few minutes would determine whether Flight 447 would become a tragic news headline or an incredible story of courage and quick thinking. Sarah's extensive knowledge of aviation, absorbed through countless conversations with her pilot father, was about to be put to the ultimate test at 30,000 feet above the Colorado mountains. Sarah's hand shook as she lifted the radio microphone to her lips. She had watched her father communicate with air traffic control dozens of times and tried to remember the proper phraseology and calm tone that pilots used. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the transmit button and spoke in the steadiest voice she could manage. Denver Center, this is Flight 447. We have an emergency situation on board. Both pilots are unconscious, and I need immediate assistance. Her voice, clearly that of a young person, crackled through the radio waves and reached the control tower, where veteran air traffic controller Mark Stevens was monitoring several aircraft in his sector. Stevens initially thought he was hearing a prank call, or perhaps a passenger making a joke, but the serious tone in Sarah's voice and the technical way she identified the aircraft made him pause. Flight 447, please repeat your last transmission. Did you say both pilots are unconscious? Affirmative, Denver Center. Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Chen are both unresponsive, but breathing. I'm a passenger, and I have some knowledge of aircraft operations. We need help right away. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued speaking, her initial fear transforming into determination. The control room at Denver International Airport erupted into controlled chaos. Stevens immediately alerted his supervisor and began coordinating with emergency services. Other air traffic controllers cleared the airspace around Flight 447, giving Sarah and her aircraft priority handling. Within minutes, the most experienced pilot available, Captain Elizabeth Warren, was rushed to the control tower to provide guidance. Meanwhile, Sarah began systematically checking the aircraft's instruments, applying knowledge she had gained from her father's patient explanations over the years. She could see that the fuel gauges showed plenty of remaining fuel. The engines were running normally, and the autopilot was maintaining their assigned altitude and heading. However, she also noticed that they were approaching a point where air traffic control would typically issue new navigation instructions. Captain Warren's voice came through the radio with calm authority. Sarah, this is Captain Warren speaking from Denver Air Traffic Control. You're doing an excellent job so far. Can you tell me what you can see on the instrument panel in front of you? Sarah carefully described what she observed, naming the various instruments and their readings with surprising accuracy. Her father's informal flying lessons during car trips and family dinners had given her a solid foundation in basic aviation knowledge. Captain Warren was amazed at the 12-year-old's understanding of aircraft systems and quickly realized that Sarah might actually be capable of following instructions to land the plane safely. Sarah, I want you to look for a switch, labeled Autopilot, or AP. Can you see if it's currently engaged? Captain Warren's voice remained steady, knowing that maintaining calm was essential for everyone's survival. Yes, I can see it. There's a green light next to the autopilot button. So I think it's on, Sarah replied, her confidence growing with each successful communication. She was beginning to understand that her years of absorbing aviation knowledge had actually prepared her for this moment, even though she had never imagined using it in such a dramatic situation. Back in the passenger cabin, other travelers were beginning to notice that something unusual was happening. Sarah's Aunt Lisa had realized her niece was missing from her seat and was growing concerned. Some passengers noticed the extended radio communications coming from the cockpit, which was unusual for a routine flight. However, most remained unaware of the life-threatening situation unfolding just feet away from them. Captain Warren began walking Sarah through basic aircraft management procedures. Sarah, I need you to check the altitude indicator. It should show approximately 30,000 feet. Can you confirm this number? Sarah found the altimeter and confirmed their altitude. demonstrating her ability to read and interpret the instruments correctly. The next challenge was much more complex. Air traffic control needed to guide Flight 447 to a suitable airport for landing, which would require changing their heading and beginning a controlled descent. This meant Sarah would need to disengage the autopilot and manually control the aircraft while following precise instructions from the ground. Sarah, before we make any changes to your flight path, I want you to find the pilot's headset and put it on. This will make our communication much clearer, Captain Warren instructed. Sarah located Captain Rodriguez's headset and carefully placed it over her ears, immediately noticing the improved audio quality. With better communication established, Captain Warren began explaining the process of changing the aircraft's heading. Sarah, you're going to need to turn the aircraft toward the nearest suitable airport. This is going to require using the control wheel in front of you, but we're going to take this very slowly and carefully. Sarah looked at the control wheel, remembering her father's explanations about how gentle inputs were required for aircraft control. Unlike driving a car, flying required smooth, measured movements and constant attention to multiple instruments simultaneously. She placed her small hands on the wheel, feeling the slight vibrations from the aircraft's movement through the air. Before we begin any maneuvers, Sarah, I want you to tell me about any other adults on the aircraft who might be able to help you. Is there anyone with any aviation experience among the passengers? Captain Warren was hoping to find additional support for the young girl who was carrying such an enormous responsibility. Sarah thought about the other passengers and remembered overhearing a conversation between two men discussing their military service. She decided to make an announcement to the cabin, knowing that she could no longer keep the emergency secret from the other passengers. Their lives depended on everyone working together for the next critical phase of the flight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sarah from the cockpit. We have an emergency situation. Both pilots are unconscious, and I'm receiving instructions from air traffic control to land the aircraft safely. If anyone has military or aviation experience, please come forward immediately to assist. The announcement sent shockwaves through the passenger cabin. Some people gasped in disbelief, others began praying, and a few immediately unbuckled their seatbelts to move toward the cockpit. Among those responding was retired Air Force Colonel David Martinez, who had logged over 3,000 hours in military aircraft during his career. As Colonel Martinez entered the cockpit and saw the unconscious pilots and the young girl at the controls, he immediately understood the gravity of the situation. However, instead of taking over completely, he positioned himself as Sarah's assistant, recognizing that she had already established communication with air traffic control and was following their instructions effectively. Sarah, I'm Colonel Martinez, and I'm here to help you. You've done an incredible job so far. Let's work together to get everyone safely on the ground, he said, his military training helping him remain calm under extreme pressure. The combination of Sarah's theoretical knowledge and the Colonel's practical experience would prove to be exactly what Flight 447 needed for the challenging approach and landing that lay ahead. With Colonel Martinez now assisting in the cockpit, Captain Warren felt more confident about guiding Flight 447 to a safe landing. The nearest suitable airport was Colorado Springs, approximately 45 minutes away at their current speed. This would give them time to properly prepare for what would be one of the most challenging landings in aviation history. Sarah, Colonel Martinez. We're going to direct you to Colorado Springs Municipal Airport. The runway there is long enough for your aircraft, and emergency crews are already standing by, Captain Warren explained through the radio. Sarah, you've been doing everything perfectly so far. Now we need to begin a very gradual descent and turn toward the airport. Colonel Martinez took a position next to Sarah, carefully observing the instrument panel while allowing her to maintain primary control of the aircraft. His military experience had taught him the importance of clear communication and following established procedures, even in emergency situations. He was impressed by Sarah's composure and knowledge, but knew that the most difficult part of the flight was still ahead of them. Sarah, I'm going to help you interpret some of the instruments, but you should continue following Captain Warren's instructions since you've been doing such a great job, Colonel Martinez said encouragingly. Your father would be very proud of how you're handling this situation. The first major challenge was disengaging the autopilot and taking manual control of the aircraft. Captain Warren walked Sarah through the process, step by step. "Sarah, when you're ready, I want you to press the autopilot disconnect button. The aircraft might feel different when you take manual control. But remember that all your movements should be very gentle and gradual." Sarah pressed the autopilot disconnect button and immediately felt the control wheel become more responsive. The aircraft continued flying smoothly, but now every input she made would directly affect their flight path. She gripped the wheel firmly but gently, remembering her father's advice that aircraft responded better to smooth inputs rather than abrupt movements. "Excellent, Sarah. Now we're going to begin a very gentle turn to the left. Turn the wheel just slightly to the left and hold it there until I tell you to level off," Captain Warren instructed. Sarah made the input carefully, watching as the heading indicator slowly began to change. The aircraft banked gently to the left, and she could feel the sensation of turning through her body. Colonel Martinez monitored the other instruments, calling out airspeed and altitude readings to help Sarah maintain awareness of the aircraft's condition. Airspeed 280 knots, altitude steady at 30,000 feet. "You're doing great, Sarah. The turn looks perfect." In the passenger cabin, other travelers had been briefed on the situation by Sarah's Aunt Lisa and several other adults who had taken charge of keeping everyone calm. Some passengers were visibly nervous, but many were amazed by the courage and skill being demonstrated by the young girl in the cockpit. Several people began quietly offering prayers and words of encouragement. As Flight 447 continued its turn toward Colorado Springs, Captain Warren began explaining the landing approach process. "Sarah, landing an aircraft involves several phases. We'll start by descending gradually while maintaining our new heading. Then we'll line up with the runway and continue descending until we touch down. Throughout this entire process, I'll be giving you very specific instructions." The descent phase began with Sarah carefully pulling back on the throttles to reduce engine power, following Captain Warren's guidance. The aircraft began a gentle descent at approximately 500 feet per minute, a rate that felt comfortable and manageable. Colonel Martinez continued monitoring the instruments and providing Sarah with constant feedback about their progress. Airspeed 260 knots, descent rate 500 feet per minute. "Looking good," he reported. "Sarah, you're handling this like a professional pilot. Your control inputs are smooth and precise." As they descended through 20,000 feet, air traffic control began vectoring them toward the airport approach path. This required several more heading changes, each one executed carefully by Sarah under Captain Warren's guidance. The radio communications became more frequent as they coordinated with Colorado Springs Tower for their emergency landing. "Flight 447, Colorado Springs Tower, we have emergency vehicles standing by and have cleared the runway for your approach. Continue following Denver Center's instructions for approach guidance," came the voice from the destination airport. At 15,000 feet, Captain Warren began preparing Sarah for the most challenging part of the flight, the final approach and landing. "Sarah, when we get closer to the airport, we'll need to lower the landing gear and adjust our speed for landing. This will change how the aircraft feels and responds, but we'll take everything one step at a time." Colonel Martinez had been quietly reviewing the aircraft's operating manual and was now able to provide additional assistance with the landing configuration. "Sarah, I've found the landing gear lever and the flap controls. When Captain Warren tells us to configure for landing, I can help you with those switches while you focus on flying the aircraft." As they descended through 10,000 feet, the Colorado Springs airport came into view in the distance. Sarah could see the long runway stretching across the landscape, with emergency vehicles lined up alongside it. The sight of their destination gave her renewed confidence and determination to complete the landing successfully. Flight 447. You're cleared for approach to runway 35. Continue your descent to 3,000 feet and maintain current heading," instructed Colorado Springs Tower. Captain Warren translated these instructions into specific actions for Sarah, guiding her through each step of the approach process. At 5,000 feet, Colonel Martinez helped Sarah configure the aircraft for landing, extending the landing gear and adjusting the flaps according to Captain Warren's instructions. The aircraft's handling characteristics changed noticeably, requiring Sarah to make small adjustments to maintain their approach path. Landing gear down and locked, flaps extended, airspeed 140 knots. Colonel Martinez reported. Sarah, the aircraft is perfectly configured for landing. You just need to follow Captain Warren's guidance to keep us lined up with the runway. The final approach required precise control as Sarah guided the aircraft down a 3-degree glide path toward the runway threshold. Captain Warren provided continuous guidance, helping her make small corrections to maintain the proper approach, angle, and airspeed. The ground grew larger in the windscreen as they descended through the final 1,000 feet. Sarah, you're doing perfectly. At 500 feet, I'll tell you to begin reducing power for touchdown. Remember, when we get close to the ground, you'll need to pull back gently on the controls to flare for landing, Captain Warren explained, her voice calm despite the enormous pressure of the situation. At 100 feet above the runway, Sarah executed the landing flare exactly as instructed, pulling back gently on the control wheel to raise the aircraft's nose and reduce their descent rate. The main landing gear touched down smoothly on the runway centerline, followed by the nose gear as Sarah relaxed the back pressure on the controls. "We're down! Excellent job, Sarah," shouted Colonel Martinez as the aircraft rolled down the runway. Sarah applied the wheel brakes carefully, bringing Flight 447 to a safe stop approximately halfway down the runway. Emergency vehicles immediately surrounded the aircraft as passengers erupted in applause and cheers. Within minutes, paramedics were on board checking the unconscious pilots, who were found to be suffering from food poisoning, but were expected to make full recoveries. Sarah emerged from the cockpit to a hero's welcome from the passengers and crew, though she remained modest about her accomplishment. The successful emergency landing of Flight 447 made international headlines, showcasing how years of curiosity and learning about aviation had prepared a 12-year-old girl to save 23 lives. Sarah's story became an inspiration to young people everywhere, demonstrating that knowledge, courage, and quick thinking could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Captain Warren later commented that Sarah's landing was smoother than many performed by experienced pilots during training. The Federal Aviation Administration conducted a thorough investigation of the incident, ultimately commending Sarah for her exceptional performance under extraordinary circumstances. Sarah returned home to a changed life, with numerous aviation organizations offering her scholarships and opportunities to pursue her dream of becoming a professional pilot. Her father, Captain James Mitchell, expressed pride beyond words for his daughter's courage and the practical application of everything she had learned through her lifelong fascination with aviation. The incident led to new emergency procedures for charter aircraft operations and increased awareness of the importance of having multiple qualified individuals aboard flights whenever possible. Sarah's remarkable achievement proved that heroes can emerge from the most unexpected places, even at 30,000 feet above the earth.